One of my favorite obligations on Passover is one that's called kezait, meaning the size of an olive, kezait, like an olive. To fulfill our Passover requirement, we're supposed to eat 3 kezites. One is the matzah. The second is the korech, which is the matzah with maror. And lastly, the tarfun, or the afikoman, if you will. And I love it because the pages, and I really mean the pages of conversation between the rabbis discussing what an olive-size anything really is really captivating. How, and more importantly, why do our rabbis dwell on such small details, figuratively and literally? Have they nothing better to do? And the answer is no, they don't, nor should they. Because developing traditions that carry us for generations is the most meaningful work we can do. It gives our life purpose and supersedes any one moment or activity in our life. Just as Rabbi Klein said, the difference between pleasure and happiness. One is temporary, one is more long-term. And thinking about the most thoughtful ways to carry on our tradition and truly understand and dissect every commandment or religious obligation is how we continue to keep our Judaism alive. This is the same for our readings this morning, whether it's Hallel. And we also read the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, from the Book of Writings. The Song of Song reads like a love poem between two people. But our rabbis grappled with understanding why we read this text on Passover, and is this really a love between two people, or perhaps between God and Israel? Or do we read from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Song, because it exhibits the springtime? We read about the blooming of the trees and the blossoming vineyards and animals frolicking. Or maybe there's a line that says, I have likened you, my darling, to a mare in Pharaoh's chariots. As a part of the love poem, the mare, the female horse, is compared to that of Pharaoh's, representing strength and beauty, albeit our enslavement in Egypt. To help us understand why we read from the Song of Songs on Passover, our rabbis combed through this text thoroughly, as they do with all of our texts, creating midrash, or stories that help us understand our text in more depth. And in this collection of midrashim, this midrash, Shir HaShirim Rabbah, our rabbis wrestle with the meaning of this text and find conflicting explanations. Some of the rabbis argue that the Song of Song retells the entire Exodus using symbolism of this love poem. American author and scholar Jacob Neusner argues that the expression of love in the Song of Song actually unfolds 3 main ideas in which our tradition places so much of its foundation: a redemption from Egypt, a redemption from Babylon, and lastly, the one at the end of days, which allows us to continue to interpret and reinterpret our modern day redemptions that give us unlimited ability to relate this text to our lives forever. To put it more plainly, we can unfold a myriad of understandings as to why and how we read this text for Passover. And to illustrate this, there's one particular line in the text which speaks of renewal in nature, and yet our rabbis take this line, which could almost seem like a throwaway line, and infuse it with depth and symbolism. Verse 3 from chapter 2 reads as follows: Like an apple tree among trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the youths. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my mouth. The rabbis begin by dissecting just the first few words of this lines as an apple tree among the trees of the wood. Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Acha from our Talmud argue that just as in the case of an apple tree, everybody avoids it in extreme heat, since it has no shade in which to sit. And so he compares this to the nations of the world who fled from sitting under the shade of God on which the Torah was given. But this was not the case for Israel. They sat under that apple tree, albeit not giving so much shade, with, quote, great delight in God's shadow. In this explanation, the Israelites hadn't yet seen all that God could do, but were satisfied with knowing that even though there wasn't much shade provided, meaning that God had saved them from Egypt, it was miraculous enough. Dayenu, it was good enough. They hadn't seen everything else God could do, but they still chose this partnership with God, or this marriage. This is one way to understand the text. Rabbi Aha takes it a step even further, saying that the Israelites were already committed before they saw God rescue them from bondage in Egypt. Rabbi Aha points out that the apple produces blossoms before leaves. So the Israelites at Mount Sinai undertook to follow God even before they saw any miracle at all. The Israelites declared they will do and then later hear or understand God's greatness. In other words, the Israelites had such faith in God before they were capable of understanding what God was able to do and sit under the metaphorical apple tree, knowing it does not provide much shade. And this is just one tiny taste of this beautiful commentary from the Shir HaShirim. And today, interestingly enough, I'm not asking you to think about who is right or who presented it better or who had a better argument. In my mind, that's the wrong question. What's more important is to set aside the time and create meaning for ourselves in our day, to dive deeply into our tradition, setting aside this time to make our redemption a meaningful one. And just as we interpret the Song of Songs and eat kizait and perform our Seder, retelling our story, this is how we keep our tradition alive and thriving. And today we also do this for our loved ones. This is why we gather for the Yizkor this morning, which we will do in just a few moments. We set aside sacred time to remember those who have made an impact in our life and preserve their memories and stories in our hearts. So let us take a page out of our tradition and live out our Judaism. I wish you all a meaningful rest of your Pesach with love and health. Chag Sameach.